Why do so many ancient coins show up with holes made to them? Big ones, small ones, circles, squares, 1, 2, sometimes 3 holes. Why, in an ancient world marked by extreme scarcity, where money was very hard to earn, why would so many people deface and potentially ruin the value of a coin? It turns out there were a lot of very surprising reasons why they did it, and in this video, I'm going to give you the answer, so let's get started. So to start this argument, we need first to contextualize a key difference between the world we live in and that of the ancients. It's actually quite obvious. We live in a world absolutely flooded with visual stimulation. We see images everywhere, from printed images to video, social media, and it actually gets worse. These are images specifically designed to stimulate your brain as much as possible in order to grab your gaze and then keep you looking, keep your attention. So you and I were being constantly conditioned to this very high frequency, high speed processing of visual information. And of course this was very different in the ancient world. Back then, making any kind of art of enough quality to keep your attention was rare, it was difficult, and it was disproportionately expensive. Think about a statue of a god inside a temple, like the Apollo Belvedere, which you can see on your screen now. This incredible marble copy of a Greek bronze original. Today, we might look at this and be impressed, of course, but maybe not completely overwhelmed, because we have access to so many images of beautiful art. But for an ancient person, an image of that caliber was not something they encountered every day. Art like this was mostly reserved for public temples or the private homes of the elites. So when the average person came face to face with a powerful image of a god or an emperor, it could have had a much stronger impact than what it does to us today. And this is exactly where coins, in their ancient context, become very impactful, because these were one of the few forms of high-quality imagery that ordinary people could actually handle and see up close. They were money, yes, but they were also objects of beauty. This is why using coins as jewelry was probably the single most common reason why so many people put holes on coins. It sounds like the most obvious answer, but we need to keep in mind what I just said, that these people lived under slower, less visually stimulating worlds. When someone saw a beautiful coin, they really stopped and looked at it, because it was that much more packed with information and visual complexity than anything else they saw routinely. And since the majority of people were very humble, this may have been their only access to art. So if ancient coins already impress us, modern folk, with our fried brains, imagine how much more powerful they could have been for someone in antiquity. Going back to that statue of Apollo, let's say you, a Greek citizen, worshipped Apollo. Seeing that statue was the closest experience you could have from being face to face with the god, because it was that much more visually complex than anything else you saw in your everyday life. Meaning a coin featuring Apollo didn't hit maybe the same emotional tone compared to the statue. It wasn't nearly as impressive, but it was certainly impactful enough. More complex than the rest of the things you saw in everyday life, and this explains why such a large number of coins were used as jewelry. So let's have a look at one of these cute little coins turned jewelry. Here's a nice little tetrobol. This is a fractional silver coin struck at the city of Abdera in the 4th century BC. And as we can see here, it had a hole made to it. And the placement of the hole is quite telling of its objective. So you see, this kind of denomination, a tetrobol, was not an excessively large amount of money, but it was also not a trivial amount either. It was something accessible to the majority of people, and it had enough size and metal to it that a hole made to it wouldn't damage the image of Apollo too much. We can see here on the obverse that it pierces the head of Apollo a little bit, not too much, but we can still see it is Apollo. And it was placed in a position that if someone was to wear this as a pendant, Apollo's head would be facing up. It was common for the Greeks and the Romans to have small shrines in their houses, and since their religion was very iconographic, there was a very strong need of some kind of visual, or even better, physical representations of the gods that you were supposed to be worshipping. Another very common type of artifact found on ancient homes are small devotional statues for these domestic shrines. Things like this bronze Etruscan statuette you're seeing on your screen. So we're talking about pre-industrial societies. These objects had to be handmade. Therefore, even something as small as this little statue, it was maybe a little bit too expensive for the average person. So rather than having something like this commissioned, a coin with an image of a god could perfectly serve as an alternative. You could wear it by yourself, or you could have it on your shrine. But the use of coins as jewelry didn't only serve a religious purpose. It was also used to show your political allegiance. This type of hold coin, to show you on which side of a political dispute you were on, was particularly common in the case of the Romans, because as you know, they loved a good civil war. So you find lots of hold Roman coins made with the specific objective of having the portrait of the character facing up. Here on your screen, for example, is a really cool example. This tiny, very delicate tremesis issued for Aelia Eudoxia, the wife of Emperor Arcadius. His reign was very turbulent, and here we can see that the hole made on this coin was once again made in a way that didn't obscure the portrait of the empress. And it also made sure that whoever wore this pendant, the portrait of the empress was pointing upwards. This coin was very likely some kind of gift given by the emperor to ensure people's loyalty, and whoever received it, to make sure they displayed that the emperor was indeed successful in buying their loyalty, this person put at least one of the coins he received on this little pendant. I really enjoy the reverse of this coin as well. It has this really delicate, tiny little cross within a wreath. So if someone wanted, they could have worn this as a crucifix and bring it to church. But you know what? As we can see from the placement of the hole, if they were to wear it like a pendant and put the cross side forward, the cross would actually be upside down, which would have been super heretical. So it's very likely that the objective of this hole was indeed to hold the image of the empress facing forward. There seems to be a direct connection between periods of political instability and instances of hold coins for these periods, which just reinforces this idea that they were used as symbols of allegiance to one of the sides in a conflict. Here, for example, we have a couple of examples that illustrate this very well. Both of these coins were issued in turbulent times. The first one is this Antoninianus of Balbinus, who reigned for just a few months. And this other really cool piece, a coin of Severina, the wife of Emperor Aurelian, a major Roman hero. And check this out, they had two holes in opposite sides of the coin. These were not pendants, they were certainly meant to be sewn onto some kind of clothing, or maybe even some piece of armor. They were supposed to be at a fixed place and point forward. And you know what? This made me curious. I want you to write in the comment section of this video, if you were like a Roman soldier and you had to attach a coin of an emperor, you could pick an emperor, to your armor. Keep in mind, you had to be seen publicly with it. Everyone would be able to see it. Which emperor would you pick and why? I'm sure this will lead to some interesting comments. And as we delve a bit deeper into the context of these characters, it actually makes perfect sense as to why people might have wanted to clearly display their allegiance. So, for example, in the case of Severina here, the death of her husband Aurelian, it was like a massive shock to everyone. He was very well liked, and there was this short period of an interregnum in which people were still trying to make sense of the situation and actually find a replacement for someone as important as Aurelian was. So the risk of a civil war breaking out during that time was incredibly high. There must have been a strong incentive on the part of the late emperors power base, their closest officials, to try to pass on a message of stability and to push maybe their soldiers, their officials, to be seen in the public having something like this, which you can see here on their clothes. It was this clear statement of, hey, I am with Aurelian, and even if he isn't amongst the living anymore, well, I'm with his wife, I'm with Severina, I'm with the legitimate Roman rulers. And that's actually so awesome if you think about it. For many collectors, these holes are generally considered this defect, but if you are more of a historically inclined numismatist, these are actually wonderful treasures, because now we're treading the line between this mass-produced object, which is old and awesome, but it then becomes an individualized artifact. And continuing on this military context, these kinds of holes on coins, they remind me a lot of a phalera. A phalera was this kind of decorative metal disc worn by Roman soldiers as a type of military decoration. We could think of these as precursors of modern medals or the ribbons that soldiers add to their uniform, because these were attached to the front part of a soldier's armor to display the awards given to that soldier for feats of bravery, for years of service. Centurions, for example, are often shown with phalerae on their chest to symbolize their status as veterans. The similarities in the placement of these holes between a phalera and the coins is actually remarkable. I wouldn't be surprised if such coins were worn alongside the phalera at some point. Moving on to another set of reasons for these holes, we leave the practical realm of jewelry and we go into a funerary context. Coins were commonly buried with the dead and can be found either intact or with holes made on them. Each had its own reasons to be. Now, when we find intact, unholed coins and graves, one of the first explanations people usually think of is that of Charon's obol, also called the viaticum. This was the idea that money was left with the deceased so they could pay for the journey into the afterlife. In many cases, these were small denominations, just enough to pay for the boatman to cross you across the river of the dead. Of course, this didn't prevent the graves of the rich to have a substantially wealthier hole left in them. I don't know, maybe they didn't want to cross into heavens with the rest of the crowd and wanted a VIP treatment from the boatman. And this part of the research led me into some very interesting rabbit holes. Because you see, coins are not only found in pre-Christian graves, they also show up in Christian contexts, showing older pagan traditions were not always successfully adapted, assimilated, or stamped out by the church. This habit was more associated with culture. It didn't always have to be like a strictly religious act. Because you see, for example, another possible explanation for coins there is the idea of the pars pro toto, which means apart from for the whole. Like in this case, the coins could serve as like a small symbolic payment from the living to the dead, almost like the next of kin leaving the deceased like a token in exchange for the inheritance they left behind. I mean, yes, this is not exactly very Christian, but it's also less directly pagan than like the Charon's obol, because it has a more legalistic tone to it. It's like a final transaction between the living and the dead. As we go to coins with holes in this funerary context, we then move into the area of unutilized goods. Objects that were deliberately made unusable for the living so they could function as an offering to the gods or as a possession sent with the dead into the afterlife. We see this logic in cultures such as the Vikings, where expensive objects like swords could be bent or broken before burial, almost as if the object had to be like removed from the world of the living before it could accompany the deceased. Coins could work in a similar way. Once a coin was like holed, strung, turned into jewelry, or simply buried with the dead, it was in most cases not usable as money anymore. It became simply decoration, or in a deeper way, its essence left the material world and entered the realm of the dead. And what's super cool is that the use of like these unutilized grave goods, that remains in use to our day in a few key contexts. Like, for example, if you go to a cemetery, you might see coins left on tombstones. This is particularly common in military graveyards, where each denomination is actually supposed to represent like a certain kind of message from the living to the dead, from like, I visited you and paid my respects, all the way to I was actually present when you died. The staff of the cemetery generally collects this money by the end of the day and uses it to fund the operations of the graveyard. But if we look at this act in its basic spiritual meaning, it's basically the same as it was back in ancient times. It's this idea of giving up that piece of money, and the essence of that coin is meant to leave our world and be directed and used by the deceased. And if you ever lost someone, it actually makes perfect sense. This idea of connecting in some way to someone who's left this world is a very strong desire that people have. A beautiful medieval example of these comes from the burial of a rich Lombard woman at Castel Trocino. She was found with a necklace containing 5 Byzantine solidi and 4 tremises, probably arranged together to create like an impressive visual pattern. The tradition was not exclusive to the wealthy, in fact. In much poorer burial contexts, even when there were no coins available, something as humble as like an old spoon could be hauled and turned into a pendant, because after all, the important thing was to decorate the dead in whatever way the living could. Many of these spoons turned improvised coin pendants can be found, for example, in medieval English graves, which I personally find fascinating because it shows that the tradition was very strongly ingrained into the culture of the area, down to the poorest strata of the population. So, coming back to the land of the living, there was also a number of reasons why holes might be put in coins for practical reasons. One important case appears in monetary systems where coins were actually valued mainly for their bullion content rather than by any legal face value. In other words, to simplify, like a silver or a gold coin was not just a state-issued token, but it was an actual piece of precious metal. The issuing authority helped guarantee like the authenticity and the purity of this object, but the real value still came from the metal itself. In this kind of system, a hole on a coin, of course, it reduced the coin's weight and therefore its value, but it did not necessarily make it useless. Its remaining worth could still be calculated as bullion. After all, there's precious metal right in front of you. This is something we see in medieval societies like the Vikings, who operated for a very long time in a pure bullion-based economy, and also in some Islamic nations, such as Al-Andalus. There, coined silver could be treated essentially like bullion. Its value came from the amount of metal it contained, from the pure weight of the silver itself. There are some fascinating written records of the Emir al-Mutamid of Seville. He loved poetry, and on certain occasions, when he was especially pleased with a poem written by someone, he would then order that a whole bunch of silver dirhams would be brought from the treasury, weighted, and given to the poet in an amount equal to the weight of the parchment on which the poem had been written. And if he was particularly impressed, he would order that the gift was supposed to match the weight of the poet himself. And the evidence of this way of transacting with silver comes from the coins themselves. Many Andalusian coins show up as fragments, cut into smaller pieces to make small change. But in other cases, coins were slotted or holed, and then small like strips of silver, sometimes cut from other coins, were inserted into them. Yeah, the coins end up looking horrible, but in a weight-based economy, it worked pretty well. If a coin was too light, just add some silver to it. Or, if someone needed to reach a very specific amount of silver for a transaction, you could just, these little additions could help bring the payment closer to the right weight. And on the other hand, as I said, like if you needed to conduct a really small transaction, just get a dirham and smash it into shards, and there you got pocket change. Islamic coins also had to carry declarations of faith written on them, so they would often also become objects of piety. Certain hole patterns suggest that some were worn as pendant or sewn into clothing, allowing the words on the coins to be like displayed close to the body. Others may have been strung together simply to make transportation and storage easier. I think out of all of the coin types I've come across, Islamic coins seem to be the ones with the largest number of non-monetary uses. There's also the curious case of Ottoman coins. In Ottoman and later Turkish wedding traditions, coins were often given as wedding gifts to the couple, and these could be pinned or sewn onto the bride's clothing, becoming like part of the wedding dress. And then after the wedding, the coins were not kept as ornaments. They were actually removed and used by the couple as part of the money which they would begin their life together with. This helps explain why so many Ottoman coins show up with holes. Yet another lovely example of something we might see as damage to the coin, actually connecting it to a very unique event. Because if you see an Ottoman coin with a hole, it almost certainly means it was once part of a wedding dress. And finally, there's the most practical reason of all. Simple transportation. Take for example this fairly big Sasanian silver coin we have here from Peroz I, who ruled in the 5th century AD. These drachmas were amongst the major silver coins moving through the famous Silk Road that connected Asia to Europe. Merchants used these kinds of coins extensively because the Sasanian Empire controlled a large swath of the territory along this route, and its silver coinage was trusted far beyond its own borders. As we can see here, it was made out of very high quality silver, and it was a wonderful store of wealth. And every now and then, like with this example, you will see holes made into them. The most practical explanation is that these could be kept on a string, making them easier to carry and to store together. Like, you can think about a merchant on a caravan making big transactions, and he certainly had to have a practical way to keep the coins and also to count them. So putting these along a string was the most practical solution. We can even compare the placement of the hole in this coin against the other ones we've seen. So I think in this case, it was not made so that one side of the coin would like hang neatly facing upwards like a pendant, and this probably implies a purely pragmatic function in this particular hole. And of course, we can't forget about the most famous hole coin of them all, the very common old Chinese cash coins. These ones came out of the mint with the hole already. For most of Chinese history, everyday money was based on low-value base metal coins, generally some kind of alloy of copper, but there were also other metals like tin, iron, or lead. These were used in the mix as well. And because each individual coin had such a low value, the number of coins needed to move like an entire society was very high. That's one of the reasons why these were already produced with the hole. It allowed the coin to be strung, carried, and then used together with a whole bunch of other coins. For any meaningful transaction, cash coins were transacted with what we would call a string of cash. And generally, one standard string of cash was 1,000 coins, which was roughly equivalent to 1.2 ounces of silver. The exact exchange rate varied a lot, but the basic point here remains the same. The hole was just part of the design of the coin, part of its intended use, which was to solve the problem of moving very large quantities of very low value individual coins, which led to some very unique situations. The traditional formula of the Chinese cash coin, it remained visually and functionally consistent for centuries. You know, this round shape, square central hole, and this simple cast manufacture. It changed so slowly over time that older coins, often they just blended together and continued circulating alongside newer ones. In periods where fresh coinage was scarce, cash coins from previous dynasties, sometimes centuries old, could still be used in everyday transactions. There are even records of enormous hoards of ancient cash coins being discovered, cleaned, and just returned into circulation because they looked so indistinguishable from the current ones. So, as you can see, there were a lot of reasons why ancient coins had holes made into them. So, next time you come across one, don't underestimate that little coin as a damaged object. It probably has some very interesting story to tell you. And what about you? Can you mention another reason why holes were made into coins? I'm pretty sure I must have missed one of them. So I hope you enjoyed yet another episode. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.